In December 1835, in a house on Lafayette Square, amidst the elegant townhomes of the bustling capital city, a girl was born of the name Rose Adele Cutts. The home was considered one of the most pretentious domiciles in the city at the time, and fittingly too, as its owner, Dolly Madison, was the Diane of Washington society. Addie, as she was known, was the daughter of James Madison Cutts, a government official who was the nephew of Dolly Madison, and her mother, Eleanora Elizabeth O'Neill, herself came from a prominent Catholic family in Maryland. In a family with such an impressive political pedigree, all eyes were on the child, expecting nothing less from its newest member. And Addie was never one to disappoint. Under the tutelage of her great-aunt, she was immersed into the political and social scene of the Washington, D.C. elite. Addie could not help but emerge as a poised and popular figure with a keen political mind. Born within a stone's throw of the White House, all her young days centered about it. She was educated at Madame Burr's School for Girls on New York Avenue in Washington. Her wonderful grace of manner, however, was not the result of education. It was the manifestation of a character beautiful by nature and developed amid happy surroundings. An only daughter, she was the close companion of her beautiful and brilliant mother, besides spending much of her time with her great-aunt. Dolly Madison's Lafayette Square mansion became Adele Cutts' second home. Its beautiful garden of flowers and fruit trees, where Addie Cutts played as a little girl, skirted along H Street to the end of the block. When she was but 7 years old, in the guise of a little flower girl, she made her first formal appearance at the White House, at a children's fancy ball given there in 1842, during the administration of President Tyler. Dolly Madison was very fond of the Cutts, and was often seen in Washington, D.C., proudly displaying little Adele at ceremonies she attended in the capital city. By the time Dolly passed, her great-niece was 14 years old, and already possessed the beauty of the purest Greek type. It was stated, whose stateliness increased as she advanced towards womanhood. The faultless outline of her profile and shapeliness of her head, her large dark eyes with chestnut hair that showed glints of a golden hue in the sunshine, the creamy tone of her skin, the perfect proportion and development of her tall figure, all combined to make the rare beauty of a personality whose charm was augmented twofold by her own unconsciousness of its rich possessions. Like many girls of southern proclivities, she spent her summers at that famous old resort, the White Sulphur Springs. There, dressed always in white, with a white handkerchief in the mornings folded across her bosom and showing her fair throat, there was about her a freshness and simplicity. Her good looks, winning personality, and impressive family connections made her a favorite of local society. During the 4 years that Franklin Pierce presided over the nation, so many beautiful women came prominently before the public at the Capitol that his was called the Beauty Administration. Many were the wives and daughters of men in high official position, but the fame of none exceeded that of the daughter of James Madison Cutts. Now 20, Addie decided it was time to settle down, and as the favored member of the creme de la creme of Washington society, she had her pick of its men. At a White House reception in 1856, Addie made the acquaintance of an Illinois senator, Stephen A. Douglas, who was then prominent as a presidential possibility, and his ringing speeches had won him a national fame equal to the intensity of his local popularity. Douglas had wonderfully magnetic powers, and usually carried his audience with him. It is small wonder, then, that at the end of a few months of an ardent and eloquent debate, with an audience consisting of one young girl, that he should have carried her completely with him. Douglas was a widower with 2 small sons, who had not yet entirely recovered from the loss of his wife. His feelings remained a carefully guarded private matter until the meeting of the Washington beauty. Like many a less fortunate man, he was instantly impressed with her absolute loveliness. He would go to her direct from the Senate chamber, while the whole city was ringing with the fame of his speeches, which she not infrequently heard from a place in the gallery, and throw all of his irresistible eloquence into his courtship of her. To many, the couple appeared an unlikely match, as Douglas was 22 years older than Adele, and lacked the refinement for which she was known. Unswayed by the opinions of their peers, after a brief courtship, on November 20th, following Buchanan's election as president, Adele and Douglas's marriage was solemnized by a Roman Catholic priest in what was widely reported as the social event of the season in the national capital. Their wedding trip to New York to visit Douglas's mother and Chicago was marked by public suppers and receptions, at which every detail of Adele's dress and appearance was recorded in the press. "It is difficult to say," wrote one observer in a Harper's Weekly article, "whether the genius of the husband or the beauty of the wife attracts the most homage." In one of their first public appearances in Washington as husband and wife, it was said that, of the many beautiful women who witnessed the incoming of Buchanan's administration at his inaugural ball, Douglas's wife was the most beautiful. The young bride reinvigorated the recently widowed senator. As reported by the New York Herald, since his first wife's death in 1853, Douglas had shunned society, allowed his whiskers to grow, and assumed a decidedly shabby appearance. Marriage to Adele worked a remarkable change. He shaved and trimmed his hair, cut down on his drinking, and appeared in a new, neat-fitting suit. From a frequenter of crossroads taverns and city oyster saloons, Douglas has been transformed into quite a genial and courtly aristocrat. Adele immediately took over the management of the senator's household, accepted the 2 Douglas boys as her own, and with Douglas's approval, raised and educated them in the Catholic faith. Stephen Douglas's substantial fortune supported Adele Douglas's brilliant salon. In 1857, Stephen and Adele built a mansion with a ballroom, by no means a frequent adjunct at the time. Under Adele's direction, the richly decorated Douglas mansion quickly became the center of the Washington social scene. A gala housewarming party in January 1858 attracted as many as 2,000 visitors. A year later, a grand ball at the Douglas mansion left nearby streets so jammed with carriages that guests had to walk several blocks to reach the front door. She was indisputably the belle of Washington, beautiful, warm-hearted, and universally loved and admired. Qualities that would serve her well in the upcoming months, as a position in politics was never dull and never certain. Later that year, Abraham Lincoln, the Republican candidate, challenged Stephen Douglas for a seat in the U.S. Senate in a series of 7 nationally famous debates on the issue of slavery. The first on August 21st and the last on October 18th. During the debates, Adele traveled with her husband through Illinois. Already known to the South and the East, her fame now spread westward, and when it was rumored that Douglas would take her to Chicago, where he had maintained a legal residence for some years, the people of the town made ready to receive her, with the enthusiasm which she inspired in them, then primarily as the young wife of Stephen A. Douglas. Their home away from home was always in hotels. sometimes at the Tremont House, and other times at the Lakeview. Her first appearance out in the new city was at St. Mary's Church, where many people who had never been in a Catholic church before were found in the congregation that Sunday morning, and far more than the usual, waited patiently out on the sidewalk to see her as she came out. The young men who had made Chicago the Queen City she is today, a fair number of them followers of Douglas, gathered about in her parlors or under the trees in the garden overlooking the lake, and though she never entered into any political discussion, the very fact that Douglas possessed such a wife inspired them with renewed ardor for his cause. In her gentle graciousness, infinite tact, and entire unconsciousness of the admiration she everywhere aroused, they felt the full force of her high breeding. When she appeared with her husband at the celebration held on the state line between Illinois and Wisconsin, in honor of the union of the two railroad companies between Chicago and Milwaukee, she was hailed with uproarious cheers. There was that in her very presence which seemed to completely satisfy every man's ideal of womanly perfection. Douglas's wife went with him through the state, winning favor for him in all eyes, even including those of the ablest Whig rascal in all Springfield, Abe Lincoln. Like her husband, she became Lincoln's warm friend. He liked to sit beside her as they journeyed from place to place and pour some funny story into her attentive ears. As the debates drew to a close, Douglas claimed victory over Lincoln, and soon the couple was off on a tour of the southern states that was much in the nature of a triumphal procession. Confident in their continued success, with the next presidential election on the horizon, Adele accompanied Douglas through his travels about the country during his 1860 campaign. Together, they commanded substantial political power that nearly landed them in the White House. But history had other plans. They graciously accepted defeat as Abraham Lincoln took office instead. When the Civil War broke out, Douglas vigorously supported Lincoln, rallying his supporters to the Union with all his energies. In late May, the unrelenting strain of the past year caught up with him. After an eloquent speech in Springfield, Douglas was stricken with fever and declined rapidly. With his hand in hers, Addie was by his side, his keen, dark eyes upon her face, as if he would forever fix upon his spirit its beautiful nature as he took his last breath. On June 3, 1861, Senator Stephen A. Douglas died in Chicago at the age of 48. Ending the reign of one of Washington's elite couples. The spot on the banks of Lake Michigan in Chicago that Douglas had reserved for his future home was bought by the state. Generous even to the point of recklessness, he died poor. Subscriptions were immediately begun among his friends towards a fund for his widow. She declined, however, to receive it, and begged that the sum raised be devoted to a monument to Douglas's memory. On Addie's return to Washington, their home was converted into Douglas Hospital, which she frequently visited during the war years and volunteered her services, despite being in mourning. The Douglases had shared an unusually close and empathetic relationship. Having already lost their only child, Ellen, who lived only a few weeks, now with her husband gone too, the grief was almost too much for the young widow to handle. Adele ceased to entertain. She lived quietly for some years in the first home of her married life, taking no part in the social world whose magnet she had been for so many seasons. But she was not forgotten, and when she again, after 4 years of seclusion, resumed her place in its midst, Her reappearance brought up innumerable memories of her earlier days, of her conquest of the little giant, and of her queenly part in his political campaigns. She was the guest of honor at a dinner given in the early winter of 1865, just as the war drew its close, by Miss Harris, whose name lives in history in a very different connection. She was sitting beside Lincoln in his box at the theater on the night he was shot. Among the guests bidden to meet Mrs. Douglas was Captain, afterwards General, Robert Williams, one of the handsomest and most gallant officers of the Army, and a member of a well-established family of Culpeper County, Virginia. Mrs. Douglas was already known to him by fame, and suspecting her to be possessed of all the tendencies of a spoiled beauty, he had no desire to meet her, though he accepted Mrs. Harris's invitation for the sake of the pleasure he would otherwise derive from her hospitality. After he had been presented to Mrs. Douglas, however, whatever enjoyment he had anticipated from meeting others there passed from his mind. Combined with a gentle dignity, there was about her all the sweet simplicity of a young girl, and nothing that ever so remotely suggested any consciousness of a fame that was as wide as her country. He followed her with all earnestness with which he had meant to avoid her, and in January 1866, she became his bride. For a time, the couple lived in the capital. The chronicle of the most magnificent ball ever given, not only in Washington, but probably in the country, which occurred shortly after her marriage, hands her name as one of the most beautiful women who participated in the brilliant event. It was given by the French minister by order of his emperor, in honor of the officers of the French fleet then anchored at Annapolis. She gradually, however, abdicated her social queenship for a crown she wore with no less grace, that of the most noble motherhood. Wedded to an army man, her life led her from post to post, and the greater part of her days from that time was spent in the West. It was said that General Williams, who was a man of some note, became so incensed at hearing himself referred to only as the husband of the former Mrs. Stephen A. Douglas, that he secured a transfer to a Western post and remained in the wilds of Western America for many years, not returning to the capital city until his wife's beauty was less conspicuous than formerly, and he himself was less sensitive on the score of personal vanity. 6 children were born from the union, all living to adulthood, 2 of her sons being in the military service of their country. The last few years of her life were passed in Washington, where her husband held the office of adjunct general until his retirement from the service. There her eldest daughter was married in January 1899 to Lieutenant John Bryson Patton, and there also, that same month, on the night of the 26th, her own life terminated at age 64. The most famous beauty of her day was put to rest in Arlington National Cemetery, soon to be followed by her second husband 2 years later. To those who knew her, she seemed little changed as the years rolled on. Time touched her lightly, as if he would not rob her of a loveliness that had been as much a charm to women as to men. Asked once the secret of her youthful appearance, she blushed like a girl and confessed that she was happy, and that there must lie the solution.